Welcome back, folks, to American Songster Radio here on WSM. I'm your host, Dom Flemons, the American Songster, and I'm really looking forward to today's episode because I will be speaking with my good friend, Branford Marsalis. Just jumping right into it, I was so pleased to get a chance to work with you on the soundtrack to Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, and when I was speaking with you in the studio about it, it was really great to hear that you mentioned that this was sort of a new territory for you in terms of this early jazz, and kind of, I'd love to just sort of unpack that a little bit and sort of, get your impression of, how is this different from the jazz that you've been doing for many years, and in what sort of ways did that play a role in the way you arranged and wrote many of the songs on Ma Rainey's Black Bottom?
Well, I mean, jazz it can be a rather complicated music. And somewhere along the way, probably in, I'd say, the late 40s, the musicians started to fall in love with the complication almost more than they fell in love with the music. And when you listen to 20s music, and some of it is quite complicated, but that was the dance music of the time, and it would have been impossible for the music to succeed if it didn't possess the dance beat. So whether you're talking about the Dixieland Jug Blowers or Paul Whiteman Orchestra, everybody understood that regardless of how complicated the music was, it had to have a beat that people could dance to. And growing up in a dance band tradition, more of an electronic thing, we're playing in a funk band, it was the same thing. It doesn't matter how well you play if you're not able to emotionally communicate feelings of positivity and fun and happiness and maintain the dance beat, you're not going to work much. So experimenting in 20s music was more an affirmation of something that I've believed in for a long time. And it was just a matter of me becoming versed with the vocabulary, because the delivery of music, as you well know, I mean, in your work and the stuff you did with the chocolate drops, I mean, the delivery system is very different than the modern delivery.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, and even reading back on your essay here, because I've got the wonderful 180-gram double vinyl package right here, which is just beautiful. You mentioned that within even all of the musicians that you had heard on a different curated playlist, which of course is beautiful, that the combination of knowledge as well as technology to be able to bring all these musical examples together was a driving force in the creation of this soundtrack. But you mentioned Paul Whiteman and King Oliver as being two musicians who were sort of your guiding lights. Could you maybe just, for people who aren't as familiar, because most of the time on the show we're talking about American roots music that's more considered in country or blues, but what sort of role does Paul Whiteman and King Oliver have with roots music, and how it fueled the formation of jazz as we know it now?
Well, I mean, King Oliver's band was it was a New Orleans band. And like a lot of Southern music, the whole is often greater than the sum of its parts. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you took musicians individually, they might play a little out of tune, or they don't play the instrument exactly well, but together they're quite formidable. Mm-hmm. And Paul's band, I mean, probably the larger percentage of his musicians were classically trained musicians. Mm. But they chose to play in dance bands. And the dance bands have roots in European folk tradition, in klezmer music, and all of these other things that came over from Europe. I mean, the music that came over from Europe was mostly dance music, because there was a lot of, the people who were more inclined to go to the opera and the classical music certainly would not be interested in getting on a boat for 2 months and 3 months in rough seas to start a new life. It was a lot of poorer people and the peasants who wanted to have a shot at something else, and they brought their musics over with them. And a lot of American music at that time is a culmination of all of these sounds crashing into one another. which is actually quite glorious in the result.
I couldn't agree more in that. To maybe speak about the song I was able to guest on, Skipscat Doodle Doo, which was originally recorded by Clifford Hayes and the Louisville Jug Band. I want to first mention the wonderful players on it. Of course, yourself on the saxophone, leading the charge. And if I get everybody right, we got Kerry Lewis, who is on the tuba, Don Vappy on the tenor banjo, Dr. Sick, a.k.a. Justin Carr on the fiddle, Sean Mason on the piano, and then there's washboard Chaz Leary on the washboard, and then Cedric Watson on the vocal, along with me playing the stonemason jug. You lovingly named the group the Crescent City Jug Band, which I think is wonderful there. And, so in choosing the musicians that you decided to use on the soundtrack, how was a song like Skipscat Doodle Doo crafted in your mind when you decided to bring together the band? And how is this indicative of some of the ways that a lot of these early 1920s recordings were put together?
Well, I think a lot of the early 1920s recordings, the musicians clearly knew each other. And there wouldn't have been the possibility of all of this long-distance travel. Like, I knew I wanted you on the jugs for sure. And I could call you up or send you an email and get you on a plane. None of that was possible in the 20s. So I think a lot of the musicians were hiring people closer to home for myriad reasons. I mean, it's just planes weren't available. So you had steamboats or automobiles were few and far between. So I think that's one significant difference. But growing up in New Orleans and hearing a lot of different people, there was actually one of those old, what do you call them, Cajun violinists who I really wanted to get. But it was one of these weird things where, at that time we were still in the middle of these COVID protocols, and he had to take a positive test, and he didn't take it.
Oh, I see.
And in true to New Orleans fashion or Louisiana fashion, they said, "Where's your COVID test?" He goes, "Oh, I forgot, but you know what? I'll do it tomorrow after the session." so they said, "No, bro, that's not going to work." So Dr. Sick was I just called around and said, "Look, man, I need a violinist." I said, "Call this dude." So literally, Justin showed up the day of the session, just like everybody else, and figured out the song.
Wow, that's beautiful. Since we're speaking of this song, Skipscat Doodle Doo, a lot of people who may not be familiar with the Louisville jug bands compared to the jug bands out of Memphis. The Memphis jug bands tend to be sort of more of a blues base, kind of like a blues band like we'd think now. But the Louisville bands, which were the first jug bands, tend to have these really wild, elaborate instrumentations. What was your impression of hearing Clifford Hayes' group? Just because it's some of the arrangements are quite outrageous to me in terms of where they go harmonically. What was your impression of some of that stuff?
I mean, I loved it. First of all, that song sequence, the harmonic sequence of that song, was a very popular sequence in songs at that time. As a matter of fact, Sonny Rollins wrote a song in the 50s called Doxy, and it is that exact harmonic song sequence.
Wow.
There's a Bix Beiderbecke song with that sequence, and it happens a lot. So that's the first thing that I noticed. Like, there are a couple of songs that were constant. Some Jelly Roll Morton songs, like some of the King Oliver and the Creole Jazz Band songs. The Millenburg Joys was a song that there were various iterations of it. King Porter Stomp, various iterations of that. So this particular song had a very popular song sequence at the time. And the saxophone player, I couldn't create that sound, and I really wanted to. But the way that he played, he wasn't the best saxophone player in the world, and that's kind of what lent itself to the sound and the way he played. And it was just like I really, because recordings back then, everybody didn't get their own individual mic, so it was really, the blend was really fascinating to me. how when the singer was singing, the piano player would play, and on one chorus, the violin would take a little solo and not get in the way of the vocal. Then the saxophone would take a little solo and not get in the way of the vocal. And the banjo, the sound of the banjo was just incredible. I mean, when I hear that sound, it makes you want to dance. Because, I mean, the banjo is mostly affiliated with bluegrass music now.
Yeah.
But when you hear that thing and it's just like blank, 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 I mean, it's just it had such a strong beat. The singer was great. I mean, the whole thing. When I heard it, it jumped right out at me, and I immediately said, "Well, there's no way it's going to be in the movie, but I really want to do this for the soundtrack."
Well, I'm so glad that you did. I mean, it's a beautiful cut, and I was just so pleased to hear the song reimagined again, just because I don't hear many people covering that type of material.
Right.
In the course of the album, you go through so many different styles of jazz and ragtime. I guess if I could just run down a few of those tracks with you, maybe just why these are such definitive moments for the movie as well as the musical environment around Ma Rainey, like for example the Deep Moaning Blues with Maxanne
right.
Lewis. How is that a testament to the legacy of Ma Rainey, Deep Moaning Blues?
Well, it was a song that Ma Rainey sang. It was a song that she popularized, and the director George Wolfe and I had this 2-week-long debate. He really wanted to try to faithfully recreate the sonic settings for Ma Rainey and get somebody who could sing like Ma Rainey. And I said it was impossible to do because people with talent don't tend to gravitate towards spending the months and years that are required to learn sounds that they can't, in their own minds, monetize at the end of that process.
I see.
So, given what modern singing is, why would anybody want to try to sound like Ma Rainey?
That's
so.
True. Yeah.
And it takes so. What I would need is much the way that Michael Mann took 2 years to transform Will Smith's body so he could correctly play Muhammad Ali. I would need a training course with someone with the proper sounding voice to get them to learn how to sing like Ma Rainey, and they never give music that much time. And for a modern audience, I thought getting someone more closely affiliated with the Southern blues style would be way more effective than trying to recreate the whole Ma Rainey thing. And he didn't disagree. I mean, he didn't agree at first, but I think eventually I said, well, I've done a search. Why don't you get your people together and try to find somebody who sounds like Ma Rainey? And good luck. And after a week, he came back and said, okay, we'll just go with Maxanne. So, I thought Maxanne did a great job on the songs. And she really worked hard on it. And, we got her down to New Orleans, and she had a bad hip. So, I mean, it took a lot for her to get there. And we just had a great vibe in the room. And but it was a song that Ma Rainey did popularize. All the songs that Maxanne sang for Viola Davis's character in the movie were songs that Ma Rainey actually sang.
That's beautiful, and Maxanne does a wonderful job. And in many ways, I did an article on Thomas A. Dorsey for the Oxford American several years back, and one of the things I found so interesting about learning more about Dorsey's role as Ma Rainey's musical director is that Ma Rainey actually relearned new material for even the old records that we're talking about as well, because her career was going back to the turn of the 20th century, 1902, 1903, and even to hear you mention that Maxanne is relearning a new style of music, even though she's a well-established singer in of herself within funk and within R&B. This is almost running right in line with Ma Rainey's own trajectory in making her early Paramount records. It's beautiful. Another person who you feature prominently on 2 songs, Jump Song and Sandman, is the wonderful Savion Glover. And I mean, I think these are the only recordings I can think of that have tap dancing featured at the forefront. I think maybe there's the Nicholas brothers might have recorded one song, "Keep a Little Twinkle in Your Eye," that features tap dancing. But I mean, maybe if you could speak a little bit about Savion coming in as a instrumentalist with his feet as a hoofer instead of a musical instrumentalist. Maybe just a little bit of how you crafted one or maybe both of those songs.
I stole that idea from King Oliver because I was listening to some early recordings of his, and I was listening for months trying to decipher the instrumentation. And it took me a long time to figure out that on 3 or 4 songs, he wasn't really using a hoofer, the way he was, but he wasn't a tap dancer. It was a soft shoe.
Oh.
And there was a dancer, a soft shoe dancer, who did that instead of using a snare drum. And it created such a unique sound, particularly in those days when you had multiple musicians basically performing into one microphone. It took months for my ears to kind of separate all of those sounds from themselves to figure out that it was a soft shoe dancer. And when I started thinking about dance, Savion came up because I know he's a big jazz fan, and I know he would understand the form, and it would take minimum amount of effort for him to do it. And he agreed to do it. And it was he's like the great international man of mystery. I mean, he came in on Wednesday night. He came in there. He did 2 takes and took a plane back to New York and was gone and said hello and goodbye, and he did his thing. And it was great that he was dancing with the group live. It wasn't an overdub session. It was really great. It was fun.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I would also maybe like to speak a little bit about the song specifically "Shoe Shopping," since that one is probably the straightest old-timey jazz number I can hear amongst the collection. But there's a certain, just heavy beat and a heavy vibe in there, as you've mentioned before.
Right.
And maybe if you could speak a little bit about that one, that would be wonderful. There.
It started with a song that the director decided not to go with, but the opening scene of the movie is the musicians leaving the L trains in Chicago and walking down the street. Mm. And as I watch the walking, there's this old jazz beat, bump, 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 and then just that. And then I wrote everything around that. And he chose not to use that cue in that scene. But this was a continuation of that beat because Chadwick Boseman's character, Levy, was walking around he was just walking around. And he stumbled into this shoe store and saw some shoes that he liked. And George, there's a point at which when he looks at the shoes, George says he wanted an effect that would be like, aha! And with the musical configuration, you just use the saxophones to play this part as soon as he looks at the shoes. But there was a longer version of that with a full ensemble that was not used in the movie.
Oh man, I would have loved to have heard that full version of that one. Well, I got time for just one more track to ask you about. You mentioned the late Chadwick Boseman, who actually passed away before the production had finished, I believe. And I couldn't help but notice.
No, it was finished.
It was finished. And then he had passed. I wasn't aware of how the timeline.
Yeah, in the process of they were already showing previews of the movie to various media people.
Oh, okay. So he did get a chance to see the film before passing, at least.
I don't know if he got a chance to see it. Actors generally don't really look at their own movies, ironically.
Oh, I see. Yeah, because I couldn't help but be moved emotionally by 2 of the more somber pieces. Levy Confronts God, and then also Chicago Sunset, which are later in it. And of course, they're emotional pieces just in the movie themselves, but what a heavy feeling to be able to have with, especially with Chadwick Boseman passing so soon after the movie was completed. Could you tell me just a bit about those and kind of maybe just some thoughts on Chadwick Boseman just in conjunction with the project?
Well, I mean, I didn't really spend a lot of time with the actors. I did work with the musicians, with Chadwick and Michael Potts, Coleman Domingo, and Glenn Turman. So yeah, all four of those guys. I did work with them mostly. I talked to them about visualization, about what it looks like to play music. For instance, in the first rehearsal that I saw, Chadwick was bending to play the trumpet the way Miles famously did, arching his back.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, well, yeah, man, you know, Miles Davis is a great inspiration, but I think he was about 2 years old when this takes place. So I don't think that he would be a good person to check out. And I said on YouTube, there are like 2 films that you can find of Louis Armstrong in the 30s playing with his group. And you should just study that tonight and get that hunch that he had when he played. And he came back the next day and he had it. Oh,
man, that's wonderful.
I mean, these guys are great. You know, all of them. They're just fantastic actors. And, you know, those little things. It's just little things like the piano player was playing, Glenn Turman was playing the stride parts. And he was playing with his hands going from in to out. When in stride, it's always out to in. So it was little things like that. And there's a rhythm that I asked Sean Mason, who was the pianist in the studio. I said, play a rhythm on all of these songs that's the same rhythm so the actor can get used to it and then he can recreate it when he actually has his hands on the piano. So that's pretty much what he did. It was this rhythm, just over and over again. Bump, 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 in every song. So Glenn got the hang of that and started. You could see his hands, and it looked like he was playing. I mean, you know, he had all of the physical rhythm down. You know, and it was like little things like I said, you have to bang on the piano because when the camera hits you, your shoulders are sloped downward, which is impossible if you're playing a piano. There are all these tells. You have to get your shoulders up and play. You can't have your shoulders down and move your arms from your elbow to the fingers. You have to put your shoulders into it.
Absolutely.
So all little things like that. But I didn't hang with those guys a lot because they were working, and we were separate. The stage was closed, and we had little tent areas outside of the stage, and people come to me sometimes to work through some things and have me look at it. But we didn't get a chance to watch them actually. We watched them on monitors. We weren't in there, so I didn't get to know the guys a lot.
Well, nevertheless, though, your direction and your guiding light on this project makes it just a fantastic representation of what Ma Rainey might have sounded like if we could have seen her in color visuals, color pictures, as well as hearing her with modern technology. And I'm so glad that you did this project, and I thank you again for inviting me to be a part of it. And I mean, it was the last thing that I did in the studio before the pandemic, and it was just a powerful moment. Right. And unfortunately, we've run out of time this time around, Branford, and I wish we had more time to speak more about Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, but hopefully we can get you on American Songster Radio again soon.
My pleasure, Dom. It's good to talk with you.
I want to send a special thanks to our producers, WSM Radio, Vania Kennard, Jeff D'Elia, and WSM's own JP Tennell. Lastly, make sure to check out my website, theamericansongster.com, for my tour and album updates. Don't forget to follow me at Dom Flemons on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and all of your favorite streaming platforms. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow my Spotify playlists, order merch from my online store, or you can send me an email with all your comments and questions to domflemonsmusic@gmail.com. Well, you've been listening to American Songster Radio on WSM. Catch you all down the road. Catch you next time around.